Morning, good afternoon, good evening. I found this really hilarious. The Taliban, in the 70s, they were fighting the Russians. And when they finally got rid of the Russians, then invited Osama bin Laden, and he started a fight with the Americans. And then they've been fighting the Americans until last year. And the war is only finished a year ago. And already somebody saying, I'm thirsty for a war. Ben, what do you think of this?
I mean, for me, I ever since I started knowing about the Taliban, it's been a fight after a fight. You know, like you said, they were with the Russians, and then I got my year with the Americans. Now they are with the Israeli. They have to pick a fight. If they don't fight, it's not a day gone by. That's just who they are. It's, you can try all peacekeeping missions, it just won't work because you're taking, you know something that they believe is a normal day. A normal day has to consist of planning a fight or fighting, the actual fighting. It's pretty sad. You cannot understand how some people are wired, really.
Well, what what I find amusing here is that we have got here a nation that has been at war. I think India, Mahatma Gandhi and his India nationalists were right in the 1940s when they were put under enormous pressure from some of the members saying that they should stop the uh, passive resistance to fight to end British rule of India. They should take up arms because they asked themselves two fundamental rhetorical questions. What kind of leaders will an armed struggle throw up? And the follow up question was, would those be the kind of people who would want to rule India? I think some of us in Zimbabwe have had the answer to both. The armed struggle has thrown the hawks. And in the case of the Taliban, ever since they stopped fighting, even a year after a war, they're already thirsty for another one. In the case of Zimbabwe, the Zanu PF thugs turned their gun immediately, the AK-47 rifles, on the civilians soon after independence. And they've either been fighting povo, or they've been fighting among themselves, or they've been fighting against imaginary neo-colonialists, or they've been looting. In the case of Zanu PF thugs, they've never had a dull moment. And unfortunately for us, of course, we can't get them out. That is the tragedy of Africa.
Yeah, in the case of Zimbabwe, ZANU PF have decided to give themselves the throne of Zimbabwe. They now believe it is their divine right to rule. Yes, you cannot take the fact that they were part of the armed struggle, but they were not all of it. ZANU PF did not fight the armed struggle all by themselves. ZANU PF fought with the civilians, those that never went to war, the Chimbwidos, the Njibas. They were part and parcel of the war. They risked their lives feeding the guerrillas. And these guerrillas, yes, Zanu PF was part of it through the Zanla forces, but there were others. There were the Zebra forces. There were other individuals that were not affiliated to any party, but felt obligated to fight for their country. How then does that make them, you know, the only rulers or the only people that deserve to have, you know, access to Zimbabwe, basically? I think, you know, that mentality is one that unfortunately was not nipped in the bud at just after the war. And now we are seeing it continue 44 years in and counting.
I totally agree. Unfortunately, that is the tragedy. When you talk to the Zanu PF spokesperson, I suppose the Zimbabwe's answer to the Taliban spokesperson here, Chris Mutsangwa, he firmly believes that Zanu PF have the right to rule Zimbabwe because they fought in the War of Liberation. And when you get him really wound up, he's in the habit of telling everybody that if they want power, they should also take up arms and fight the war, all from scratch, which is really tragic because that is what is really wrong with our political system, where yesterday's liberators have more often than not become today's oppressors, so that the country has got to fight all over the new oppressors to gain our independence, our freedom, our basic human rights. And as we have seen with our friends in the opposition, they have also tended to claim that they've got the right to do as they please. How many times have you and me heard some of these people say, oh, you shouldn't criticize them, you are not in the trenches, or you are not on the ground, as if being on the ground is now a virtue, a ticket, where those who are not on the ground have no say in the governance of Zimbabwe. That is the tragic. We keep going round and round in circles. That is the tragic with not only Zimbabwe, but most African countries. But Zimbabwe has probably taken that, to the other extreme.
Now, the difference, I would like to compare the independence of South Africa and the independence of Zimbabwe. Just the two. One thing South Africa got right was after the war, after apartheid, there was an inclusion. Yes, they had, the Truth and Reconciliation, which I think was a good thing. And then after that, everybody became South Africa. They became part and parcel of the Rainbow Nation. Whereas now across the border, Zimbabwe, everything became Zanu PF. Just after the war, going into the next election, it was already fist fights. They were already itching for a fight like the Taliban. Then we started going into Gukurahundi. You know, there is great difference between how each nation, South Africa and Zimbabwe, took off. One, took off on the right path to include everybody, to build, a rainbow nation.
Can you imagine that
We took one.
on the occasion of an
Sorry about that.
We became myopic. We became one-sided. We became me, Zanu PF, and nothing else. And then that was when we took it upon, Zanu took it upon themselves to bash the people into their program. Pretty sad, pretty sad.
Well, here's an audio of Chris Msangwa talking about the recent clampdown that the regime mounted to arresting people to stop them protesting during the SADC, the recent SADC summit.
important summit like this. So the cameras, your cameras, they move away from the event at the new parliament buildings in Mount Hampden, showing this majestic building to the world, and the graceful heads of states being made anxious about their presence in Zimbabwe because of tumultuous crowds organized by deviant Zimbabweans. No, we couldn't allow that. It was not allowed. And I'm very happy about that the security sector lived up to its billing. We are talking of generally people who are given to disorder, people who never want to see their country cast in a good light. If you don't want your country cast in a good light, so chawakagarira panyika chii? Kungosvora chete zvinhu zvekumba kwamai yako. Ukaenda kudonwa doro nevamwe ukadotamba nevamwe, amai vangu havaiti, baba vangu havaiti, vanin'ina vangu havaiti. Chinyi ichocho? Imbowanwo chaunofarirawo. This was a show for Zimbabweans in the sub-region. Even if you are the opposition, musiwo womboitawo munhu kwaye. But no, they just work for the interests of those who never want to see Africa in good light. So with deviants, those are deviants, and they were dealt with properly. And they failed. And we are very happy that they failed. And they will never succeed again. This was their last at misbehavior. They will never get another chance again. Because now they know what happens when they try to behave in a certain manner. And I'm sure there will be a good reason to free them up soon afterwards because there's no show to disturb. The show, what they wanted to step is over, so there's absolutely no reason to keep them at the status expense in jail after failing. We reward their failure by giving them their freedom. But there's nothing to disturb anymore.
How tragic. We've come this far and we found ourselves going round and round in circles. Zimbabwe has been now independent for 44 years. The country has never held free, fair, and credible elections. And last year, Zanu PF blatantly rigged the elections. And even SADC in the AU condemned the election process. And the regime mounts, turns the country into a police state, arresting people before they even have committed the crime. And there is the Zanu PF spokesperson making a joke of it. It really is tragic. We seem to be going round and round in circles. The freedom, the justice, and human rights that we thought were fighting to gain for ourselves if all come to nothing. I think that is really disappointing. I don't know whether Ben would want to comment on the comment we've just got from one of our listeners there.
I agree with our viewer to say, I mean, it's obvious with the way you find Chris Mtswangwa, Zanu PF spokesperson. He is finding humor in operation. I mean, how do you justify arresting somebody for a crime that you think they will commit maybe after 2 years? It's unheard of. This is the first time it has happened. I've never heard somebody, being arrested to say you may have a tendency to commit, crimes. So, I'm going to arrest you in advance. It's unheard of. And worse now, Zanu PF has taken it a step further, creating a situation of hostage diplomacy. There is a Czech Republican guy, that had visited Zimbabwe, and he was apparently in Masvingo, and he was taking videos, and there was no electricity, and there was no water. Fact. And he got arrested for broadcasting that or sharing that on social media, and they locked him up. That his charges were he was giving false information. And during his bail hearing, there was no electricity in the courtroom that they were in. And then the lawyer, his lawyer, the Czech Republican's lawyer, asked the judge to say, would it be a lie if I'm to say there is no electricity in this court? And everybody burst out laughing because that was the truth. When he broadcast, there was no electricity, there was no water. So now Zanu PF has now gone to a stage where they don't want information or the truth to come out to the world. So they will try and squash it as hard and as tight as they can. This is where they have now gone to an extent of taking away all the freedoms and the rights of Zimbabweans and of the world. Whoever comes into Zimbabwe now fears whatever you take, whatever you post online, lest you be locked up. And you know how they are. They will let you go when they feel like. And here we have Chris Mtswangwa. He's finding humor to say, now we can let them go on frivolous charges, by the way.
Yeah, it is tragic. I think it is almost certain that 2028, when we're supposed to have our next election, Zanu PF is going to rig those elections. Zanu PF is not going to hold free, fair, and credible elections in 2028. Unfortunately, the opposition will participate as they've participated in the past, knowing fully well that Zanu PF is rigging the elections, knowing fully well that by participating they give Zanu PF legitimacy, but they'll go ahead and participate out of greed. And unfortunately, their Chamisa Chete Chete brigade will be conned into participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuate the dictatorship because they will believe Chamisa's almost idiotic lie, like, oh, I've plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. I think we are in trouble in Zimbabwe. Our own, our very own Zanu PF Taliban supposedly fought for our independence. But ever since they got into power, they think they have the divine right to rule. Ending the Zanu PF dictatorship is not going to be easy. As much as Zanu PF would want to hang on to power, I think we could have ended it if we didn't have a corrupt, incompetent, and sellout opposition. But even then, we still would have ended Zanu PF dictatorship if we did not have, and this is the worst thing, if we did not have millions of some of these Chamisa Chete Chete brigade who will not open their eyes and their minds and see CCC leaders for who they are. They failed to implement even one token reform in 24 years, including the 5 in the GNU. How anyone can fail to see that beggars belief. Thank you very much for joining us. Ben, I don't know whether you want to give your closing remark.
In closing, I would say, I would agree with you to say, removing this dictatorship is not going to be easy, but our job has been made easier, not once, but on a lot of occasions. We expected SADC to do things that we were supposed to do for ourselves. But however, SADC gave us a solution to our problems. SADC has always given us solutions. All other observer missions have been giving us solutions to our problems. The solutions lie in the recommendations. These need to be implemented for us to fix our elections. And they've always said this. So we cannot afford to go into another election without fixing those. Zanu PF will rig those elections if the situation or if the political environment remains the same. That's a fact. And there is no one that can deny, because history proves itself. That is what Zanu PF has been doing. So come 2028, it is my hope that we would have managed to implement the reforms necessary to go into an election, a free, fair, and credible election. Failure to do that, it is pointless. There is no tactics or strategies that can ever win against, an election that comprises of ZANU, the participant, who is also the commissioner, who is also the judge, who is everything. You will never win against that kind of a system. Impossible. And history again proves that. We need to implement reforms. And our fight to implement these reforms should start now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and those of you who were able to join us tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good day.